Evening, everyone. Welcome to our May 13th, 2020 Planning Board meeting. Can everybody please, let's say the pledge together. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America, to the republic which stands, nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Hope everyone's getting through these tough times. Barbara, could you please take the roll call?
Chairman Curry.
Here.
Ms. Gannon.
Here.
Ms. Garbino. Mr. Goldenberg.
Here.
Mr. McNamara.
Here.
Mr. Prince.
Here.
And Mr. Zaberto.
Chris has to unmute.
Present.
Good.
Sorry.
It's good. Good to hear your voices. I wish we were all with each other, but whatever. Well, it is what it is. First on our agenda is a time extension for the Banfi and Ward application for final subdivision approval. I'm pretty sure everyone has read the town planner's memo explaining the kind of the circumstances why this was not able to be done. So what they're requesting is a 90-day time extension for the filing of a subdivision plat with the county clerk. Is there any board members' comments, or Surratt, do you want to say anything about this?
Not unless anybody has questions. As you know, Aniko has been really on top of everything along the way. And obviously there's just been a holdup. We did get some kind of correspondence from the county, but it's not clear. And we all felt it was best if we gave her the extension, just so there's no issues here.
Right.
I have no problem with it, and we may expect a few of these with what's going on at the county office and the state offices.
Exactly right. Yes. All right, then I'll make the motion that we that we grant the 60-day sign
90-day.
90 days.
Signing. Yes, the extension would be to August 11th, 2020. And for the record, the property is located at 37 Meikle Street, and it's in the R80 zone.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is an informal appearance concerning summer sanitation. I thought what I'd do, let us start off is whoever's here representing the applicant, if you would just give a brief presentation, and then we'll listen to staff and planning board. Go ahead, please.
Sure. Good evening, Honorable Chairman and members of the board. My name is Leslie Snyder, and I'm a partner in the law firm of Snyder & Snyder, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Somer Sanitation, Inc. First and foremost, I just wanted to say that it's good to see that you are all well during this difficult time, and I appreciate your taking the time to consider this application. Somer Sanitation has submitted a sketch plan and other documentation in order to have the planning board perform an informal review so that Somer Sanitation can proceed to a more formal site plan shortly. Somer Sanitation is requesting approvals to improve its existing solid waste transfer recycling facility at the property known as 241 Route 100. This property consists of over 13 acres and is located in the OLI zoning district, where recycling facilities like the facility here are permitted. The proposed improvements are solely in order to comply with recent requirements of the DEC. In order to comply with these DEC regulations, the applicant is required to have a fully enclosed building so that all the material the applicant processes at the site will be handled in a fully enclosed building prior to being transported to an off-site location for final disposal or reuse. In addition to the fully enclosed building, the applicant is proposing to replace its existing scale house with an updated scale house to weigh the material and a parking pavilion to cover the applicant's vehicles. Just by way of background, for more than 30 years, the applicant has been operating the facility, providing transfer and recycling of non-hazardous materials to service the town of Somers and the surrounding area. The applicant has been providing necessary infrastructure to the community. Over the years, the applicant has been designated as the town of Somers recycling facility, and it annually sponsors a bulk refuse drop-off as well as many other community programs. At this time, I'd like to have Rich Calogero from Cornerstone Engineering just review the sketch plan with you so we can get any of your input and then move forward with filing a more formal application. So
Let me
Rich,
just let me just interrupt
Sure.
you for a second. Paul, can you let Joe Barbagallo in, please?
Yeah, no, I'm in now. He let me in.
Okay,
John.
thanks. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
no problem. So at this time, I was going to have Rich Calogero, the engineer of record, to review the plan with you if you like. I assume you've gotten copies of the plan, but I think he can put it on through Zoom and just quickly go over it with you.
Hey, Counselor, just before you switch that over, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Is this project an elective project, or is this pursuant to some sort of regulation, legislation to have this done?
It's pursuant to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC regulations. The regulations are requiring a fully enclosed building. Right now, they have a roofed enclosure that I actually worked on and got approval for from the town in 1993, so quite some time ago. And the new regulations now require that the building has to have be fully enclosed. It can't just be a roofed enclosure.
Okay, thank you.
Just a follow up to that. Is this a result of a violation or just simply a regulatory change that you're catching up with, but not associated with a violation?
There's no violation. This is just in connection with recent regulations that will be put in effect over the next, about I think 2 years. We have to have it ready in about
That's
2
good.
years.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. I'm going to share the screen and I'll put the conceptual site plan up on the screen so everyone can see it. And then as I speak about it, I'll be able to point with my cursor. So let's see. If I can. Not
Should be there you
Oh,
go.
here it goes.
okay. Too many things open here. Can everyone see the plan?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, looks good, guys.
Yeah.
And before that, you might have saw two young ladies on the screen. Those are my daughters. So anyhow, just to correct one thing that was that Leslie stated, I am not the engineer of record. I'm the project manager on this. We have a professional engineer that is reviewing and signing all of the plans. That won't be me. So the question was raised regarding why we're doing this. So the New York State DEC changed their regulations a couple of years ago, requiring the handling of all solid waste, construction debris, recyclables within a fully enclosed building. And in addition to the building being fully enclosed, the vehicles, as they're tipping, have to be completely in the building. With the current structure doesn't have doors. It has 2 openings. The vehicles back into the building and can tip, but they can't completely get inside the building. So that's the requirement today. The facility currently can continue to operate under its existing permit, but they need to come into compliance with the new current regulations by May 2022, when their permit would be up for renewal. So that's why this project is being proposed. So as Leslie stated, right now there are 2 scales. There's a scale house basically right on the property line. We're going to remove that and move it here to sit between the two scales. So there's an inbound scale and an outbound scale. Vehicles come in on the inbound scale, and as they currently do, and they tip in the existing structure. With the construction in the new structure, the vehicles will be able to come. They'll be weighed. They'll come in and they'll back into the building completely, and then either tip construction debris, solid waste, or recyclable material on the tipping floor, which is then loaded into larger tractor trailers to be taken off-site for either disposal or, in the case of the recyclable materials, taken to a processing facility where they're then reprocessed and dealt with that way. The trailers will be in this. There's a loading tunnel that's lower here. They'll be loaded. There will be a scale in the loading tunnel, so that when the trailers meet their weight, they can then be removed and either taken directly off site, either to the recycling facility or to a disposal facility, or they can be parked in this parking pavilion, which will be covered. There's an outbound scale, so the vehicles coming in after they tip, they're then weighed so that the tare weight can be obtained, and then they exit the facility.
Yeah, I think those are the three details of the improvements.
Yeah, the other detail is, yeah, currently recyclable materials are tipped over here. This is a concrete pad, and then they're loaded into a trailer and taken off site. So that is currently done outside, but that will be also done in this building, in the new building, once it's constructed. Basically, that's a summary of the project as how it'll work. We will need 3 variances, which I know we will end up having to go to the zoning board for. We're only this scale house building will only be 24 feet from the property line. There's a 40-foot setback, which is shown here in this green dashed line. There's also a requirement in the code for a 50-foot vegetated area between this project, or a light industrial zone project, and a residential zone. So this property back here is residentially zoned, although it's heavy, and I'm not sure that it's even really that buildable.
That's the Majestic property, and it's very vegetated back there, but we're going to need some relief. So I think for the board tonight, we just wanted to show the 3 improvements that we're proposing, and then so we can get a better, just to make sure you don't have any objection to anything that we're doing, so that we can proceed to site plan and go to the zoning board for the necessary variances.
Joe or Surratt, do you want to have any comments? Or, excuse me, is that all from the applicant? Do you want to hear our comments?
Yes.
and our staff? So Joe and Surratt, do you want to weigh in, please?
I'm gonna let Surratt, I just have one question.
Let me talk first, because I have had several conversations with Leslie and with Rich. I had looked at this initially, and we talked about should they come to the board informally, and I thought that was a good idea just for everybody to get a look at it. Turned out it was, because when I looked at the application, the things that you've gotten now, when you look at their bulk table, they were treating the entire site as one lot for setback purposes, which is not the case. It's 3 lots. long skinny lot, which is where the entrance driveway is off of Route 100. The sort of main central lot where the new building and, well, the new building is on that lot. On the long skinny lot is where the scales are, and the pavilion is actually on the third lot. And I discussed this with Roland, and we talked about merging the three. And after I had a conversation with Leslie, it became clear that the original approvals really were for the first two lots, and that third lot, which is where the second access off of Route 100 is, was a separate approval. And what they're going to do is they're going to merge the first two lots. So when we see in their final application, the bulk table, the calculations will not be for the 36 some odd acres. It'll be for the acreage of the first two lots, and the requirements that they need for their variances will be based on that. And the building, which is the pavilion, is actually on that third lot. So it gets a little more complicated, but we've now discussed it. They know what they have to do. And according to Roland, though they will do these calculations now, they don't actually have to accomplish the merger until we get to close to final approval, and they need to accomplish that before any final approvals are granted. So this is, one of the good reasons they did this informal initially, and we got this part kind of straightened out, and we'll see how they deal with this when they come back with their revised site plan and their application for, regular site plan approval.
Joe?
Joe?
Serena, I'm curious
Joe?
about, so with the pavilion, can you not hear me? Can
Yeah,
you
I
not
can
hear
hear
me?
you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, this is not my original question, but now that Saret said what she said, I have another question. So, did Roland discuss if the pavilion is going to be on its own lot, but yet that pavilion has no access from the lot in which it's on? Essentially, we're building it in the corner of that lot.
Okay, Joe.
Did he talk at
Yes,
all
Joe,
about that?
Yes,
Yeah.
no, he didn't
Yeah.
talk about that, but Leslie and I talked about that for exactly the reasons that you're looking at that now, in that you can't access it because of the steep slopes. So the one thing that Leslie and I determined is that they will also have to provide an easement from what will turn out to be the first two merged lots in order to have access to that parking pavilion, which has access from the, that first driveway off of Route 100. So yes, you are seeing exactly what she and I spoke about.
Yeah, but it also, so even if we had an easement from one lot to the other, yes, right now they're both owned by the same entity, but what's to say in the future they won't be? And shouldn't, I don't know, I got to think about this, Leslie.
Actually, they're not.
let me
Yeah,
think about it.
no.
They're
Actually,
not
Joe,
on-
Excuse me?
I discussed
Point.
with Roland because
Let me just straighten one thing out. The first two lots are owned by the same entity, which is why they can be merged. According to Leslie, the
Yes.
third lot is not owned by the same entity, and that is why all three lots are not being merged together.
yeah, that's not exactly
Right.
accurate, but really the reality, the two lots, 7.1 and 9, will be merged in, prior to final approval. The lot 11, which is the big lot to the left, where the parking pavilion is, that has access, that has frontage on a street, but it will be accessed going through lot 9. So what I discussed with Roland is, since that lot operates, can operate independently, that will have an access easement, which will record. So you can get to
Right,
the
and
parking pavilion
my
through
thought on
lot
this.
9. Right.
Right, and I understand all that, right? And you're going to put legal instruments in place to get those in place. I'm looking at this a little differently, meaning, yes, I have access off of Route 100 into this lot, but I have no way to get to this building from that access, and that's the lot that it's on. And I just have to think about that. Do we need to demonstrate that it is, for example, possible to build access?
Right, but if you actually have a valid access easement, and as long as it fronts a road, then you're allowed to do it through an easement. But we can talk about that offline, Joe. And I can.
So that's just one thing that I yeah. I mean, I'm just, it's. I just want to think about it and talk to Roland about it. I mean, what it strikes me as is, I guess it raises questions why we're not cutting a piece off of that other lot and merging it with this one, for example, and keep all the things on one lot, because otherwise I wind up with a building on a lot that the only way you can access it is through another property. Now, unless that's going to be in perpetuity, I guess, the access, I guess if they sold it, that the person they sold it to could still leverage that same access. But it's that process that I want to just think through. I don't have
That's right.
It would run with the land.
It would run with the land. The same.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly right, Joe.
So, Joe, I just might want to talk that through with you a little bit. And the other question that I have, this was my original question, was, are you looking for an increase in your throughput capacity in any way, neither recyclables or solid waste as part of this coming in compliance with code?
No. No. Nothing will change.
The exact permit limits that are in place, so the permit limits that are in place now will remain in terms of for tonnages of recyclables. So there won't be, for example, more traffic because there's more waste coming through. It's the same amount of waste, we're just doing it in a building instead of a combination of in and out.
Correct.
Exactly. That's correct.
When we go
I do
for,
have one question.
when
I
summer
thought I would.
sanitation goes
Right.
for,
That's fine. Yeah. I'm sorry, Sarah.
I thought I read something in the materials that you submitted that there was going to be some new activity on the site. Was that, do I recall that incorrectly, or?
No. I think that not this application. Everything is, it's the same.
Okay.
We're operating under the same permit. We're going to be renewing that same permit.
So, Richard, when you're preparing the site plan, one of the things that's going to be really important is understanding, existing surface conditions from imperviousness perspective versus existing versus proposed for the stormwater. I mean, stormwater here is going to be a pretty big issue for us to deal with. There's a lot of catching up to do. The fact that we're doing this site now, I think I want to take a really hard look at stormwater. Here, you don't have a whole lot of space to do anything with. There may be more easements required on the other lot in order to accommodate stormwater controls. We'll see what you can do. But ultimately, understanding existing versus future conditions from a perviousness perspective will be really important. And, then I guess we should be leveraging the redevelopment regs and seeing what we're going to need to do from a stormwater perspective.
So currently, all of the stormwater is handled in this, there's a large stormwater basin on lot 11 that, there's a large stormwater basin down here on lot 11 that, where the stormwater is directed to at the current time. And our plan is to continue to direct the stormwater to that basin.
All right, and we'll have to just prove out the sizing that it works. It might need to be expanded. You might need to put additional treatment. My suspicion is, right, you'll have to be doing some of those things. And sorry, or maybe not, but I suspect you're gonna need easements, right? Stormwater easements too, and maintenance agreements. There's gonna be a lot of, because you're relying on a stormwater treatment that lies on a lot that you don't own. You're gonna need an easement to use it, and I'm gonna need to understand the maintenance agreement and how the maintenance agreement between the two land lots function.
That won't be a problem. The same entity controls all three of them, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just more
And
legal
I
instruments,
understand.
more work for you, Leslie.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. We'll have those documents together.
Yeah.
Good point.
No, it's good.
So those are the big things for me.
Can I
I
ask
think
a
really for me,
question?
this is a stormwater. It's fun to be back in the solid waste game. I don't know, Richard, if Mark Swyk is still with you, but I know Mark from many, many years ago.
Mark
I used to sit
Swyk
on the board of directors with us.
yes, Mark is. I didn't realize that. I'll let him know you were asking about him.
Say hi to him for me. Tell him Joe Barbagallo says hi. He'll be like, well,
I will.
that's something from 20 years ago. I used to design these facilities all over the country, so it's nice to get a look. I will give you some input on your traffic flow when the time comes, when I see that in more detail. But from the town's perspective, I'm mostly going to be focused on stormwater here.
Okay, that's fine. I look forward to it.
Can somebody,
Any
can we
board
ask
member
questions?
comments? Absolutely.
Rich,
Yeah, this
maybe
is
you could take the plan
Chris
down.
Roberto's
Well,
got a-
No, don't take the plan down yet. My question is,
Okay.
my
okay.
question is that you say that the three lots are controlled by the same entity, but you say that its ownership is separate. Who owns this third lot? You haven't referenced that.
No. The three lots are separate legal entities, but the owners of the three separate entities are related. So there's three legal separate entities for each lot, but they're related parties are the principals. That's why we'll be able to work collectively.
Well, then why can't you, I'm still confused on why you can't make all three lots, combine all three lots. Maybe this is a
Well,
dumb
lot
question.
11,
that's
which is
what I
the
don't
side lot,
understand.
right. No, lot 11, actually, several years ago, had its own site plan. It actually has some other, it may have some other potential uses in the future, so it really should be treated separately. There's no real reason to make
Okay.
all three lots one lot.
Okay.
May I ask a
Economics.
question?
This is Chris Roberto. I have a question too. I don't know who's keeping the order, but.
Go ahead, Vicky.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can see that there's an access drive coming off of Route 100 that comes in, and above that, below the proposed parking pavilion is an area called empty container parking. My eye is drawn to that over and over again. I have not been to the site, so could you, with the arrow, indicate to me where the drive goes and describe to me the type of ground coverage that there is and what goes on at empty container parking? I understand it's not the subject of it, but I'm just kind of curious to flow, not having been to the site.
Sure. So the access Lot 11 is down here. You can see the cursor. You come in, and then this opens up, and it's all basically a gravel, open area, gravel yard. And Somer Sanitation actually leases this also, and they store empty roll-off containers down there.
Okay.
That's
All right,
basically it.
thank you.
Sure.
Richard,
This is
will that
Chris Roberto
activity
with a-
Chris,
continue?
you had a question, didn't you?
Yeah.
Joe just had a
Well, how's
comment,
that-
follow up.
how's that-
Vicky, Joe, what? Just
Has
bear
that
with
I
me.
gravel
just had a
pit, has that
follow-up, which
activity
was,
Ask
Vicky.
it, Joe. Well, I just wanted to know how long
was
has
just-
that area been
How long has it been gravel? To be perfectly honest with you, as long as I've been working with Somer Sanitation, which is about 15 years now. So they've been using it as container storage for quite some time. Empty containers.
Right, so I have two questions now associated with that aspect. So will that area continue to be used for empty containers in the future?
I believe so, yes.
So then shouldn't that be part of the site plan? And that also
Well,
leads.
wait, but I believe that area already had a site plan to put those containers there. So
Well,
lot
and that's what I
11,
was going to ask, Leslie, when you mentioned,
yes,
as we start looking now at this as really two connected approvals, shouldn't the lot 11 start with what did you have approved before? And this is going to be a modification to that site plan. And then you're going to have you're going to have modifications to two separate site plans.
I think that's actually a good point. We should take the lot 11 site plan and modify that. I agree with you, and then
Correct.
keep that separate, and then we'll
Correct.
have the other two lots will become one lot, and that'll have its own site plan. So
Correct.
that's very helpful.
I think that's right.
I appreciate that direction.
Rich, can you trace on the map how you get out from the proposed parking pavilion back out to Route 100? Because I don't see that I can't distinguish that on the map.
Yeah, and it will make it, will definitely, it'll be a lot clearer when we actually engineer this plan. This is just a concept plan, a sketch, but they'll be pulled right out here, and they'll pull straight out and down the existing drive, just like they do now. Loaded trailers come straight down here, and then they turn out onto Route 100, and I believe head to 84.
I have a series of questions, if I can take
turn analysis on that? I'm sorry, Chris.
Excuse
It
me?
was another follow-up. I'm sorry. Rich,
No,
I was going to say, you'll give us an order
let's-
turn analysis.
Sure, we can do that. We've already run auto turn just to make sure that, the vehicles can get around back here and get in and on and off the scales and turn and get in, but we can show all of that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's all right, Joe. So in the project manager, and I'm sorry, sir, I don't remember your name. Rich, there it is.
Rich.
You had said that, yes, I got it. You had said that the trucks are required to do the tipping, and I'm assuming dumping the refuse inside the building. How much higher is the
Correct.
new proposed structure compared to the current one that we have? Is there any increase in height and any increase in square footage? Are we
Yes,
going
there
right
is.
over the current footprint of? Yes, it is what, sir?
So one of the variances that we need is a variance. The existing buildings are 32 feet high, which is 2 feet higher than, I believe it's 2 feet higher than the code allows for a 30-foot high structured building. And we would need a 34-foot building. 34 feet high. The building is approximately 14,000 square feet, which is more than double the size of the existing building. And the reason for that is to be able to get the vehicles in. The collection vehicles will come and they need to be fully inside the building, not just the back end, and they be fully inside the building. So that's the reason for the larger building.
Are you required to have carbon monoxide ventilation systems in there now, since you're going to have trucks coming in and out? Is there an exhaust system on the roof?
There is ventilation requirement, and the building will be designed to include that. Correct.
And is the machinery that's required for that on the roof, is that encompass the 34-foot height, or do you guys plan to go even higher than that with that equipment?
No, that equipment will be at the rear of the building.
Okay.
The fans
Got
will
it.
be on the rear of the
And then
building.
my last question,
It's not gonna,
and then my go ahead, Counselor, I'm sorry.
no, I was just saying, it's not gonna increase the height of the building more than the 34 feet. So we're permitted to have 30 feet, will be 4 feet, but we'll need to get that variance from the zoning board.
All right, very, very good. And then now my last and final question is the proposed parking pavilion. Is that fully encompassing with walls, or is it just a canopy top, or is it just open?
It's just a canopy top, and it will be connected to a storage tank for any fluids, leachate that might that could drip out of the trucks or whatnot. Right now the full trailers, if they're not removed immediately, are stored over here. This is where the existing building sits, right on the property line. And there's a concrete pad that has a wall, and there's a drain, and that's connected to an existing tank. So all of those, any fluids are collected in that tank, and they're removed for disposal periodically. The roof is intended to reduce the volume, because right now any rainwater that falls on this parking area is leachate and ends up having to be trucked off site for disposal. So by putting a canopy over the top, we will significantly reduce the amount of water that has to be removed for disposal.
Got it. And none of that
Leslie,
is to accept. And none of that is to accept hazardous waste in this facility, right? Like waste oil or anything like that?
No, not at all.
Correct.
It's just,
Yeah. No hazardous waste.
No, and it's taken off site, and Summer Sanitation has a contract with a wastewater treatment plant. It goes there.
got it. All right, I'm done with my
Leslie,
questions. Thank you
again,
for your time.
All right, sorry, Chris, to interrupt you. Just Leslie, to remind myself, is this in a groundwater protection overlay district?
It is. So we'll need to get that special permit for that as well.
Right, so we need to make sure that we look carefully at how they're collecting everything and what the impacts are.
We'll show that on our formal site
guessing
plan as well.
I'm thinking that we're quite a ways away from a site walk. Probably wait to see what happens when you go for your variances. Does that make sense, Joe and Saret and board?
Well, they will be coming back,
Well-
if I'm correct, Leslie. The intent is for them to really make these into full site plans. I don't know if those will be ready for the, the June meeting, if you will make the cutoff date. But whenever it is that
we will.
they resubmit you won't be ready, you said.
Not for
Yeah,
June,
whenever
we're
they're-
gonna
we're
shoot
aiming
for
to
July.
have your, we're gonna shoot,
You're gonna go
to be
for
on your
July.
July meeting and submit it in June. Right.
I'm sorry, say it again, Leslie. Submit in-
We're aiming for your July meeting, which I think has a June 23rd, I looked, submittal
Okay.
date.
So that is, we will see a full engineered plan based on all these comments tonight. And I suspect Joe and I will be probably talking with them about a couple of things between now and then. But there's lots of things that they need to do that planning board members brought out, that Joe brought out, that I brought out. And earlier, this question of, access in and the driveways. I think, Vicky, you mentioned that. I said to them that they needed to really clearly identify where those driveways were and how all these things on the site are accessed from these driveways and the scales, et cetera. Make it all very clear. It's almost impossible to see where those are now. So anyway, at that meeting is in July, when the board would, indicate its intent to be lead agency. They would clearly identify at that time what their need for variances are. And again, I'm thinking if, Joe, you did have a good point about a separate site plan for, I guess it's lot 11, that building itself may require another variance if we have to make sure it is or isn't defined, that pavilion, as a structure. If it's a structure, it won't need variances, but it clearly is closer to the property line than the setbacks would require. So all of this has to be looked at carefully, but then the planning board would presumably take a look, see what it thinks, and they would then move on to the zoning board, and the planning board might want to give some type of memo to the zoning board related to, it acting as lead agency and where it stands on these variances. Another thing that you just brought up, Leslie, about all of these fans in the big building, I think one of the things, we need to see in the EAF when you revise it is what the increase is from, the building sizes, what the existing is versus the proposed on all of these, and what kinds of, noise factors, what dBAs, and, if there's any issue with any of these things, since even though there's nothing there,
Yeah,
you are
yeah, actually,
to residential
Right, actually,
zone.
this will be an improvement, because right now it's outside, it's not enclosed, but the noise will actually be less, but we'll be able to present that.
Okay, good.
And the fans wouldn't be running at night either, so.
All right, well, you
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
explain all of that.
Yep, and we'll have
Okay.
Specifications on and what the decibel levels are for that. Yep, okay.
Yeah, Joe,
John?
Because
he's got a secret
No,
question.
go ahead, Joe. Do you have a secret question, Joe?
Yeah, since you brought up lead agency, I did have a secret question. I'm curious how you're handling the DEC permitting. Is that, and so are we coordinating in any way with the DEC? Are they going to also seek to be lead agency on their permit? Have you had any conversations in that regard about the DEC's role in this Or do you
Right, this is-
anticipate getting the DEC permit, DEC solid waste permit as like a condition of final approval? But then I would like to know what the DEC's expectations are relative to us interacting with them, because they are an involved agency here. So I'm just, because they have
Right,
to
well-
issue a permit for this activity as well. So I'm just curious, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Right. Right. Just the DEC, this is a renewal because we have a permit. So we're going to be renewing the permit. And in the typically, and I believe we've had some preliminary discussions with DEC, but they're looking for the town, just like they did in the past. I've worked on this before, the town to be the lead agency. So they'd be looking for the planning board to be the lead agency. For them, this is an enhancement. Obviously, these are all improvements that make the site better. So they're just waiting for the town's neg deck.
Okay, thank you, Leslie.
Sure.
I have one request. Because these site plans are, or ultimate site plans are intrinsic and busy, can we get paper, full-size paper copies versus digital?
Of course.
Digital
We
is-
definitely will.
is tough
We
to-
definitely did that. We actually submitted paper copies even for this, but we will certainly give you paper copies. It's a lot easier than looking it on the screen. So I understand that concern.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, John?
Yes.
Ask a question, John. Are we
No,
we
no,
assuming
no. I just said, I don't think we're not near a site walk. I'm just saying.
No, I understand that. My question is though, that we would have to have a sidewalk in which we would then have some input in these variances that the zoning board is going to be asked to approve. I assume that's the procedure?
Yeah, if they go to the ZBA, the procedure for them obtaining any variance would be the same as is typical. And yes, that would involve a referral to the planning board for its comments. You'd be looking at those issues as well.
All right,
Well,
because,
following that, then maybe we should set up a site walk
I don't
earlier
think
then.
we volunteer. I don't think we volunteer or we wait for their request.
but having recently been on the zoning board, the variances that they're asking here seem to be extremely complicated, and I think that they need the expertise of the planning board, having made their suggestions, so that the zoning board will have a lot more information than they normally have on doing approving variances, because this seems to be a unique problem here.
I don't disagree,
Right.
but they should
Yeah.
information, not us volunteering. Because we volunteer at this time and we don't next time, there's going to be hell to pay.
Okay, I volunteer or whatever.
They
I
should
just,
request.
If
okay,
if I could just point out a couple of items with regards to the variances that we are going to be seeking. Right now, we have a scale house building that is right on the property line. We're going to remove that and put a scale house right here, which is 24 feet from the property line. And this vegetated buffer area up that's supposed to be 50 feet. The requirement is 50 from a residentially zoned area, which is the inside of this blue, this area up here. Right now, the transfer station building is literally on the property line. So we're going to move the structure away from the property line. We are able to provide a 10-foot buffer, but and you'll see it when you go out there. This is all woods And as you go to the north,
Mhm.
there's a steep slope up to the nearest, the next roadway, which is 900 feet up the hill. So this is all heavily wooded. And this along here is all wooded. It's a relatively narrow strip, but this is all overgrown with trees and shrubs and other, wooded. It's a wooded area. So it's not, the variances are not that complicated. The 3 lots and some of the idiosyncrasies of that may be, but I kind of think the variances are relatively simple, and
Well,
are less than the existing issues with the buildings being that close to literally on the property line.
yeah,
Which we got
but you're,
variances, which just so the board's aware, we got variances for what's there now. So we had gone to the zoning board many years ago, obviously. So
Leslie?
Yeah,
John,
I'm just-
Richard,
I've used this facility. I've used this
What was that? I
facility
missed that.
several times, and I've used the facility and taken stuff to the facility several times. Never in my did I realize that the scale house was on the property line. It just appears to be totally on site.
Exactly.
Not up against
exactly,
any
because it's so wooded.
Well,
Yeah,
there's also
yeah.
multiple,
It looks,
Richard, Dennis, there's also multiple, they're using a new scale house now. There's one against the property line. There's another one kind of, you see the second scale. So you might, there's 2 different scale house locations. This is the one that is right on the property line. It's
The
not
one
the one
that,
that they use routinely for the public. It's the one interior they're using routinely for the public. And the traffic flow is in a clockwise direction now. And now they're putting it back to where it should be in the counterclockwise. So that's good. But Richard, I had a
I'm
question
just,
about
go ahead.
site plan. So, and I always hesitate to ask this, but I'm gonna need to pull out the old site plan on what you have an approval for. And then that'll be our starting point, right? We're looking at going to a modification. So we're gonna modify the old site plan. So for example, when we're looking at things like impervious surfaces, for example, if the old site plan showed impervious surfaces in one area and now over time those have grown, right? Those areas that it has grown is not considered existing for our stormwater analysis. It's going to go back to what you had a permit for. And I guess I'm just curious in general, how closely, because I haven't looked at your existing site plan, how closely are the existing operations to your existing site plan?
Well, the existing solid waste, the existing transfer station is located right
And not-
here.
Right, I know where the buildings are. I'm saying about all the other operations, like, I mean, I've lived in this town for 20-something years, and I've seen
Yep.
this place grow over time, adding recycling
Yep.
here, adding drop-off areas
No, I hear you.
there. I don't recall those ever getting approvals. I just wonder if they might have been on the original site plan.
Yeah, I don't know, but this area right here, where this is used now, it's all millings. The most of the site is covered with asphalt millings.
Right, and my question ultimately comes back to is, are those areas in compliance with your site plan, or are you in violation of your existing site plan?
No,
That-
we're not in violation of the existing site plan, but I think this original properties, goes way, way, way back, more than 30 years. So, and was originally, from a predecessor of like 2 owners ago. So, but this when you say site plan, there's probably pieces that have come over the many years.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of.
I don't
would
know if there's,
imagine-
I know lot 11 has a site plan from 2000 and whatever year. The other ones are so old because this actual property has been used, it's more than 30 years. I think it was been used for this use since like the 20s. Way before my time, thank you.
You know,
But,
All I'm saying is I'm going to start, and we'll start and pull a copy of the existing, what the town has on its records for what is your existing approvals consist of. And I just want to let you know that I'm going to be looking at that, and then we'll be starting with that as the basis. And if it's grown in compliance with the town's approval, that's great. If it's grown in a way that's outside of the town's approval, I'm not talking about doing anything other than let's just fix that condition now, most specifically with stormwater.
okay, well, we appreciate this because it's obviously we're doing something, we're coming to the town to improve the existing operations. So we want to work collaboratively to have,
Which coincidentally is what happened in 93, because prior to 93, when this building was put up, there was a concrete slab here, and the same materials were brought onto that slab, tipped, loaded into larger vehicles, and taken out site for disposal. In the early 90s, the DEC changed their regulations and required that the waste be transferred under roofs, which is, the Leslie and the predecessor to the current applicant went to the town and got an approval to put the structure up on, as an improvement by putting the material in a building. And we're basically back doing the same thing for another upgrade to meet new regulations.
Yeah, and I'm sure all that's true, but we just have to make sure, since 93, there's been a lot of changes to our town code, some of the environmental laws, right? And that's why Joe is really harping on the stormwater stuff,
That's fine.
especially at a waste
Understood.
refuse facility. So we just want to be thorough. I mean, since we opened this project up, I think what Joe is saying is that we just want to make sure that everything is in compliance. And that's really for your safety, as well as the safety of everyone within the town, to make sure that you're operating properly and within all of that. And you're right, it's collaborative, but we just need to make sure that it's conforming with all of the regulations regarding everything. And it looks like you're going to have a lot. You got a lot of variances here. You're trading some, right? So yeah, you may not need a variance to being close to a property line, but you're going to need to file a new one now for a structure above 30 feet. So there's a lot to dig into here. I think that, and I agree with some of the sentiments on the board, that a site walk would be too premature, and we can still talk about that later. Because I just see that there's still a lot of administrative and a lot of research that's got to get done in this to make sure that this is heading in the right direction from the beginning.
Can I ask another question? Who's the engineer for these plans? Because every time I magnify it, that goes all blurry. I can see PE and it looks like Prentice, but
Francis Shaw, correct.
All right, thank you. That's what, as Dennis said, sometimes it's great to see it on the screen, but when you try to use resolution, you lose detail. Thank you.
Any other board member comments?
No.
Well,
thank you very much.
I thank you. I think you have enough information. You obviously, the both of you will be in touch with Joe and Surratt and move this along.
Yep.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much.
appreciate
We
your
appreciate your input and you're taking the time. So thank you so much.
Stay safe, and thank you very much for coming before us tonight.
You too.
You
Be
too.
well.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, last on our agenda is discussion of the draft local law. Surratt, you want to kind of lead us on this?
Yeah. This came about as part of the review of the Cobbling Rock. And
Yes.
what was determined as I looked at the zoning was that even though, in fact, we had treated two prior subdivisions in a similar manner, the zoning itself actually did not address the way we wanted to treat these. So I discussed with Roland what I felt was missing in the ordinance, and he agreed with me, and we have determined to make a very simple addition to Article 3, Roman numeral 3A, the conservation zoning, and that happens in section E, number 1. Currently, the way the conservation zoning reads, the only way you can do or create a conservation area is if a recognized conservation organization or the town is willing to accept those conservation areas. And what we found in the past was, except for very large, significant conservation areas, such as Stewart Farm, there aren't conservation organizations that are willing to take them, and the town is not interested in taking these. So we now have projects where there are smaller areas that encompass either steep slopes or wetlands or areas that are environmentally sensitive. And the proposals have been to include these on individual lots to preclude the need for a homeowners association, which the board and the rest of us have determined in the end are not that effective in controlling these. So in order to create subdivisions where these type of sensitive areas can be deed restricted on individual parcels, we needed an amendment to the zone. And the way we did that was the following. I'll read you what the language says. It's really a line and a half that we added here. It says the ownership of an open space area, of all open space areas, and this is the change, within the conservation subdivision shall be divided among all owners of building lots having such open space areas on their respective lots. So as long as they are within a lot, and they are deed restricted area, it becomes the responsibility of the individual homeowner who purchases that lot with the deed restrictions. All of that will, of course, be made known as part of the purchase of that property, and those properties will remain in perpetuity, that they will not be able to be built upon or in any way destroyed. So that's really what this is all about. And it is on for a public hearing tomorrow night at the town board. And if the planning board is in agreement, I will take your recommendation, write something tomorrow morning, send it over to the town board so they know what your disposition is on this, and then presumably they will be able to close the public hearing, pass it, and then when you have your June meeting and Cobbling Rock comes back again, then you will be able to act on the preliminary subdivision, because this will have been approved, and you will be able to act on the lots that actually are reflected of this new type of zoning.
Sounds good.
I have a question for clarity.
Sure.
Does that mean now that these conservation lots will be married to a lot that will have a house on it and become
Correct.
homeowner's responsibility to maintain?
Correct, and that will be part of the deed restricted, and you'll see I've been drafting some a draft amendment that it identifies that each individual homeowner has the responsibility for conserving these. The board actually did this in the past on 2 different projects without understanding that, in fact, the zoning did not address that. So we're now correcting that.
Chris, I have a question, Saret. You both used 2 different words. One, Chris said maintain, and you said, I forgot what you said, but you didn't say maintain. Are they required to maintain it or just not build in it?
They're not to disturb it.
Okay,
Right. I mean, that's kind of what I meant by
Yeah,
maintain.
right.
I don't expect them to trim trees and
Right.
grass, but
right,
it can't be touched. It's attached to their deed. Does it go towards their total acreage? Like their deed acreage and potential tax calculations based on the lot size, or?
I don't know how the tax assessor treats the fact that, they have these conservation areas on their lots. We can certainly ask.
This is Joe Ariel. I actually can tell you that in these situations, and I will say that this is a relatively common approach in zoning ordinances, just, my sort of my 2 cents on the language being considered. But on the specific question, usually, frankly, one of the advantages of accepting the burden of a conservation set aside on your property is that it is taken into account because it diminishes the development value of your property. And so usually it does affect, but appropriately so. The trade-off for the town is the open space, et cetera. And for the individual, they get an amenity. And for the town, you end up with a deed restriction where every owner that takes knows going in that that's their, that they've got responsibility there. And I want to address one other thing that came up, which is that the language of the restriction itself will spell out what their obligations are. So it's not just a matter of where the deed restriction will say, and you've got a conservation easement on your property. The language as it's ultimately crafted will let the owner know both their obligations, but more likely, as Saret has said, it's more about non-disturbance actually, and what they can't do in the area. But to answer the question that was asked, it will be spelled out in the language. That's how this usually works.
good.
Yeah, I don't have any objections to the way Saret presented that language to recommend to the town board personally.
May I ask a question? The language, the original language, as I think about it, seems to be written with an eye toward cluster development. Because imagine a situation where you have, like my screen in front of me, a big rectangle, but we have some land we want to conserve off to the right-hand side. So we cluster the housing and it's appropriate to the situation. We cluster it off to the left and leave that portion of the right as the conservation easement with the responsibility equally divided. As I read it, it sounds more like it's written for that situation. And changing it would seem to me, in the way it's changed, and I think it's totally appropriate, the change as suggested for Cobbling Rock, but I'm wondering how it would fit if at some point we process it with a parcel that was appropriate for cluster development and a conservation subdivision. So question I would like to pose to Saret and Joe Ariel and Joe Barbagallo too. Am I understanding this incorrectly? Do you foresee any problems down the road for a development that we can't see and don't have on the table today? Would this be an impediment to doing something with that? Or have I misunderstood it all?
Yeah, I'm actually not clear on what you're saying, Vicky. I'm looking at the language, and the language is saying that before it was allowing to be equally divided and required the creation of a homeowners association.
That's why I'm thinking it's sort of meant for a cluster, because you don't have to be adjacent to it. You could be off to the side, but everybody together had a responsibility for the whole thing. That's why it feels to me like it was written for a cluster subdivision situation.
I think that's true, and I think the idea here would be that your concern, Vicky, would be covered by the fact that not every homeowner would necessarily share in the new way that this is being proposed. So in other words, it might turn out to be like in your example of your rectangle. If the set aside land was all to the right side of your rectangle, then the only adjacent properties that would have that deed restriction and be responsible for it, and the lots would be appropriately sliced up in this way, would be the ones that bordered on, for lack of a better word, that or included that land to the right of your rectangle.
Right.
And so what it does is it takes out the notion of the entire community supporting that stuff through a homeowners association, and just makes it something that any buyer is taking into account when they say, hey, I love this lot, and this is one of the things I love about it, and this is one of the things you've got to, do to take care of it.
Okay, as long as it doesn't cluster development on a subdivision in the future, because that can provide the avenue toward less intrusive development of the land, let's say.
Right. No, it's a great concern, and simply put, I think you will not be impeded in that consideration.
In that case, I have no problem with it. I think it's
Joe, I'm confused with what Vicky's saying, because I think it's important. Why aren't we adding this as an alternative way of doing conservation and not in replace of homeowners? Or am I misunderstanding this?
Well, it is one of the things the board could discuss, is whether or not it wants to add this kind of possibility as one of the ways,
I think
without eliminating the others that are already in the code. That certainly could be part of your recommendation. I think the primary focus is that it's a really prudent thing to add one way or another. So I will say that the trend, and probably Surratt and Joe, I think, will confirm this. The trend is away from the homeowners association concept and even the town ownership concept, because once upon a time, when these provisions were originally conceived of, there was, these conservation entities and the towns themselves were excited about managing such properties and incentivizing people to do it, and kind of claiming credit for having locked these things down. These days, that's just not the case anymore. It's just become very, very rare, frankly, that anybody can be found to take care of this. So the homeowners association solution theoretically solves that.
Right.
But you do then potentially end up with, they have also fallen a bit out of favor, because for one thing, if the homeowners association fails, you've often got, it's often because there's some really systemic fundamental problem with the homeowners association ability to keep things up, and you've kind of got nowhere to go with it. But also the homeowners, in that case, you do sometimes have lots participating that aren't really benefiting from the adjacency, for instance, of that conservation area. So I'm not suggesting that leaving those things in the provision are a bad idea because it's possible that a case will come along where somebody is willing to do it and it seems like the right thing to do. So that's
Right.
certainly something the board could consider, but I think that that's kind of where the trend is.
Yeah, I think we should leave it option open for both things. Because as Cindy has said, you know, you could have a situation where there's cluster housing and you don't want to put the responsibility of a conservation area on the one house that happens to be adjacent to the conservation area when the other houses are in a homeowners association, for say. Vincent.
Joe, and I think, Joe, you comment on this. If there is one home that has responsibility for it, there will not be a homeowners association.
Right. Well, that's right. In a particular case, if you opted for the option that's being described by this zoning code change, this text amendment, if you opted for that, then no, there'd be no need for a homeowners association, or if there was a homeowners association, they wouldn't have responsibility for it. It would just be that one owner or the various owners that whose land encompassed the conserved area. I think what's being suggested by Bruce is that you could have a situation where in a particular application, the applicant was willing to establish a homeowners association, and it seemed to the board like a reasonable thing to do, a better plan. In other words, maybe the conservation area is part of like a centrally located area that everybody does benefit from. So anyway, my point is, I think they're not mutually exclusive necessarily, and and it is something the board could discuss if they were inclined to go that way.
This town has had two basic different types of development. One that's built single-family homes on oversized lots, which typically have conservation areas within an individual lot for which that homeowner is associated. You also have the cluster, like the Willows or Greenbrier, where the homeowners deliberately form a homeowners association to take care of centrally located lands for use by all of the members.
Right.
There are two different types of development. We have to have regulations which cover both types.
I agree with Dennis, but I have one question. What can a homeowners association physically do with the land that's designated under a conservation situation like this? Can they make trails? Can they put benches? Or is it just land that can never be touched? We just stare at trees all day. And so I think you have to look at what's the functionality.
It's land that's not developed.
Understood.
Homeowners associations have failed. Look at Greenbrier. Look at the drainage easements problems that they've never addressed.
Yeah, but then I can argue, look at the Lake Shinnerock and their association and in Purdy's. Like, you've got a lot of, I mean, I think that individual homeowner associations fail for different reasons. I just want to know, if I was someone who was in this situation and I wanted to form a homeowners association within my clustered homes, and I've got these conservation easements that are on my, within the development, what can I do with them other than never touch them? And so what is the incentive for an HOA to say, oh yeah, like, I understand Bruce's point about common areas, right? Roads, areas that aren't designated as conservation, that they can utilize an empty lot, double lot, we can put a park there or something. But what exactly can be done with one of these designated areas, other than attach it to a deed and tell the homeowner that, listen, the 4-acre lot that you were about to buy is now 6, and you can't do anything with those 2 acres, right? That's what I'm gathering the new proposed legislation would end up doing.
Chris, I don't think that having the easement means you can't use it. You can
Right.
enjoy the property, you just can't develop the property. So if your question is what level of development, would a trail, I could see saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong. The planning board might even be advocating for, I've seen the planning board advocate for a walking trail through a conservation area, multiple boards. So, I would say the hard restriction is you can't develop it with anything that requires a permit to do.
Right.
You can't cut trees, you can't put down impervious surface, but you could walk your property, you could probably hunt that property, I don't think that there are access restrictions, it's just
You
development.
can't develop it.
You just
No,
can't.
no. The whole point, remember, is that these are environmentally sensitive features that need to be preserved. So I don't know which of the activities that anybody is thinking about qualify in that category. Maybe Joe Ariel wants to talk about it, but that's the point.
Typically the language that's used in this type of easement is that passive recreation is the most that's allowed. So it's
Right.
a little bit like what Joe Barbagallo was describing. And that's why it can make sense for an individual homeowner, because the idea is you can go sit and watch the birds, you can walk through the property, you just can't develop the property, or as Joe said, typically you can't do anything that would require a permit to do. But I have to say that I think that conversation is still kind of missing what I think Bruce's point really is. And Bruce, I don't want to speak for you. I think all that Bruce is saying is the nature of the restriction will be determined by the planning board's review. So for instance, if the conservation easement area, whether it's controlled by individual landowners or a homeowners association, whatever the case may be, is going to describe what that applicant or what that owner is allowed to do in the property. So you could have a situation where they've got an affirmative obligation to develop walking trails or whatever the case may be, right? Or you could have a restriction when the approval comes down that says you can't do anything there except walk and enjoy the view, right? The point is, I think what Bruce is just saying is that in order to accomplish that, why not have at your disposal any of the three options? Which is, if it appears to you that the best, like for instance, let's say you had this incredible vista as a conservation area and some local land conservancy actually was interested in taking it. Well, you might want to do it, right? Or maybe the town's interested in taking it for some particular reason that makes a ton of sense, right? I think all Bruce is saying is, why should you replace those things with this language? And simply, you could consider your comment to the town board being, why not leave those two possibilities in and simply add the possibility of these individual conservation.
I like that solution.
Yeah, can I
Joe.
perhaps clarify that for everybody? If you look at what you were given in your packages, which is the language, what we could, if the board decides that they want to make that recommendation to the town board, the way that could read is actually the following. We'd leave the language basically the way it is now, where it starts out, the ownership of all open space areas, currently it says shall be divided. I would say areas shall either be divided equally, blah, 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 or then we add the other one, or shall be located within the conservation equally, shall be divided equally among. So we have everything that's there now, or this alternative.
I think
think
that's good.
Yeah, and I have to say that for what it's worth, as you know, as counsel sitting here at the moment, I like it too. I just don't think it hurts you. I don't think there's a downside to it, really.
No, I agree with Joe. Now that he laid it out that way, I definitely think
Do
that.
you need to keep the initial, Saret, do you need to keep the initial addition of the language within the conservation subdivision? Because as you phrased it, you took the ownership of all open space areas shall be divided, and you omitted that initial addition. Do you need to retain and make it the ownership of all open space areas within the conservation subdivision shall be divided, and then proceed from there? And maybe
So
that's,
well, we could, but I mean, the whole thing is about conservation subdivisions, that the entire section is conservation subdivisions, Vicky.
I know, but
I
it
would
was
rather, I would only, well, we could do that, but then I say shall either,
either, okay.
and then we have everything that's there, and then go to or shall be
Good idea.
divided among all owners of building lots having such open space areas on their respective lots.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I will write that up as your recommendation to the town board, and get it to them for tomorrow night's public hearing.
Thank you very much, Saret.
Okay.
Well done. That's a good amendment. That's good.
Yeah, I definitely think inclusion of all three options is really good for us and for the town to be able to, you know, customize some of these site plans to fit. I agree. I think don't limit yourself. Have all the options at your disposal. Let the applicant put one forth, and then we can determine whether or not it's applicable in that case. If not, we offer other solutions, and now we would have that.
Okay,
Yes.
you want to take a vote on that?
Yes. I'll make a motion that we vote on the last proposal that we've had to include that current addition along with the existing ones.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, board. That was a very good job tonight. Excellent.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all, staff. And thank you, Joe Arioli.
You need a
Thank you
motion to
very
close,
much.
right?
Oh,
My
yeah.
pleasure. Any other board member comments?
Today's my mom's 90th birthday.
Hey, bless.
Congratulations.
Birthday to your mom.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Hopefully she's not in a nursing home.
No, unfortunately, she is,
Oh, boy. Well,
but she's safe there. We checked. There's no. It's one of the
okay.
safer ones at the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
So our
Yeah.
next regularly scheduled meeting is Wednesday, June 10th at 7:30 PM. At this point, are we anticipating it's a Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I expect we will.
all right, sounds good.
Let's be positive and hope that maybe in July we'll get back to normalcy somewhat.
June 10th.
June?
No, I'm saying July.
Oh, yeah.
Let's hope in July maybe we can get back to the normal ways of being.
All right. I'll bring the coffee again to the next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you all. All right. Like Vicky said, our next meeting is the 10th, 7:30, June 10th. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Let's do
Good
it.
night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Night.
Right.